What if I told you that every time you get angry at someone else, you're actually getting angry at yourself? Picture this. You're scrolling through social media and see a post that makes your blood boil. Your heart races, your jaw clenches, and suddenly you're typing a furious response. But here's the disturbing truth that Carl Jung discovered over a century ago. That person didn't make you angry. You made you angry. And once you understand this psychological mechanism, you'll never be emotionally hijacked again. The man who tried to take his own life at age 38, who heard voices and saw visions, who descended into what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, emerged with perhaps the most powerful method for emotional mastery ever conceived. By the end of this video, you'll uncover Jung's revolutionary technique that transforms anger from your master into your teacher. Have you ever noticed how certain people can push your buttons instantly? Your boss walks into the room, and suddenly you feel that familiar tension. Your family member makes a comment, and you're instantly defensive. A stranger cuts you off in traffic, and you're ready to lose your mind. We've all been there. That moment when someone else's behavior seems to reach inside your chest, grab your emotions, and shake them like a snow globe. You feel powerless, reactive, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. And the worst part? You hate feeling this way, but you can't seem to stop it from happening. Jung called this phenomenon projection, and he discovered something that will completely change how you see every emotional reaction for the rest of your life. The people who trigger you the most aren't your enemies. They're your mirrors. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jung spent years studying why we react so intensely to certain people and behaviors. What he found shocked even him. Inside your psyche lives what Jung called the shadow, a hidden part of yourself containing everything you've rejected, denied, or refused to acknowledge about who you are. Think of it as your psychological basement, where you've shoved all the parts of yourself that don't fit your self-image. Now here's the critical insight that changes everything. When someone displays a behavior that enrages you, it's because they're exhibiting a shadow aspect of yourself that you refuse to own. The intensity of your anger is directly proportional to how much you've disowned that trait in yourself. That arrogant person who makes you furious, they're showing you your own hidden arrogance. That lazy coworker who drives you crazy, they're reflecting your own suppressed laziness. That judgmental relative who makes you want to scream, look closer. You'll find your own inner judge staring back at you. In the 1940s, psychologist Gordon Allport conducted a fascinating study that perfectly demonstrates Jung's theory. He asked people to rate personality traits they found most offensive in others, then had close friends and family members rate these same people on those exact traits. The results were stunning. People consistently rated themselves as having very little of the traits they found most irritating in others, while their friends and family saw these traits clearly in them. The more someone denied having a particular trait, the more others saw it in their behavior. Jung would have nodded knowingly at these results. He understood that our emotional reactions to others are like emotional X-rays, revealing the exact shape of our own denied shadow material. But here's what makes this even more powerful. Jung discovered that the people we have the strongest positive reactions to are also projections. That person you instantly admire, who seems to have everything you lack, they're not showing you what you don't have. They're showing you what you've disowned about yourself. Jung developed a revolutionary technique for working with these projections, and once you master it, emotional disturbance becomes nearly impossible. He called it withdrawing projections, but I call it the mirror exercise. Here's how it works. The next time someone triggers a strong emotional reaction in you, anger, irritation, disgust, even intense admiration, stop and ask yourself this question: how am I like this person? Not, how are they wrong? Or, why are they doing this to me? But how am I like them? Your mind will immediately resist this question. It will come up with 1,000 reasons why you're nothing like this person. That's your ego desperately trying to maintain its self-image. Push past the resistance and keep asking. If someone's arrogance infuriates you, ask, when am I arrogant? How do I act superior to others? Maybe you're not arrogant about the same things, but where in your life do you look down on people? Maybe you judge people for being uneducated while this person judges people for being poor. If someone's neediness annoys you, ask, when am I needy? How do I seek attention or validation? Maybe you don't do it as openly, but where in your life are you seeking approval or trying to get your needs met through others? The moment you can honestly see that trait in yourself, something magical happens. The emotional charge disappears. You can't stay angry at someone for displaying a behavior you've acknowledged and accepted in yourself. But Jung discovered something even deeper. Beyond the shadow, he identified two other psychological structures that create emotional reactions: the anima in men and the animus in women. The anima represents the unconscious feminine aspect in men: emotion, intuition, relatedness. When a man hasn't integrated his anima, he projects it onto women, expecting them to carry his emotional life for him. When women don't live up to this impossible standard, he becomes angry, disappointed, moody. The animus represents the unconscious masculine aspect in women: logic, assertion, spirit. When a woman hasn't integrated her animus, she projects it onto men, expecting them to be her strength, her voice, her power in the world. When men fail to meet this projection, she becomes critical, demanding, frustrated. Jung noted that whenever we experience exaggerated reactions, a sense of urgency, and a general overwhelming feeling, that's the works of the anima. The same applies to animus possession in women. The solution: the same mirror technique applies. When you have an intense reaction to someone of the opposite gender, ask, what quality are they expressing that I need to develop in myself? Jung's own life provides the perfect example of this process. In his late 30s, he experienced what he called his creative illness, a period of intense psychological turmoil where he heard voices, saw visions, and felt like he was losing his mind. Instead of running from these experiences, Jung did something extraordinary. He engaged with them. He dialogued with the voices, painted the visions, and treated his psychological symptoms as messengers rather than enemies. What he discovered was that he had been projecting his own creative, intuitive side onto his mentor, Sigmund Freud. When their relationship ended, Jung was forced to confront and integrate these aspects of himself. The voices and visions weren't signs of madness. They were his own disowned creativity, demanding recognition. This process of shadow integration transformed Jung from a rigid, rational psychiatrist into one of history's most creative and insightful psychologists. But more importantly for our purposes, it made him virtually unshakable emotionally. Let me share how this works in practice with a real example. Imagine you have a coworker who constantly interrupts you in meetings. Every time they cut you off mid-sentence, you feel a surge of rage. Traditional anger management would tell you to count to 10, take deep breaths, or express your feelings assertively. Jung's method goes deeper. First, ask, how am I like this person? When do I interrupt others? Maybe you don't interrupt in meetings, but perhaps you interrupt your children when they're telling you about their day. Or maybe you interrupt your own thoughts and intuitions, cutting off your inner voice before it can finish speaking. Second, ask, what shadow aspect is this revealing? Perhaps the interrupting coworker represents your own impatience, your own need to be heard, your own fear of being overlooked. Maybe they're showing you a part of yourself that feels invisible and is desperately trying to be seen. Third, ask, what do I need to integrate? Maybe you need to acknowledge your own impatience and find healthier ways to express it. Maybe you need to recognize your own need for attention and validation. Maybe you need to start interrupting the negative voice in your head that constantly cuts off your confidence. Once you've done this shadow work, something remarkable happens. The coworker can interrupt all they want, and you'll barely notice. They no longer have the power to disturb your emotional equilibrium because you've withdrawn your projection and reclaimed that energy for yourself. Jung developed a specific practice for this work that you can use every single day. He called it holding the tension of opposites. Here's the technique. Every morning, before you start your day, spend 5 minutes asking yourself, what qualities in others have been bothering me lately? Write them down. Then, for each quality, ask, how am I like this? And, how can I integrate this quality in a healthy way? Write these insights down too. For example, if someone's selfishness has been irritating you, you might realize that you need to be more selfish in healthy ways, setting better boundaries, taking care of your own needs, saying no to requests that drain you. If someone's emotional volatility has been triggering you, you might recognize that you've been suppressing your own emotions and need to find healthier ways to express your feelings. The goal isn't to become more like the people who annoy you. The goal is to integrate these shadow aspects consciously and intentionally so they no longer control you from the unconscious. For those ready to go deeper, Jung developed a technique called active imagination for working directly with shadow material. Here's how it works. When someone triggers a strong reaction in you, instead of acting on it or suppressing it, go somewhere private and have an imaginary conversation with that person. But here's the key. Speak to them as if they represent a part of yourself. Ask them, what are you trying to teach me? What part of myself are you representing? What do I need to learn from you? Then, listen for their response. Not with your logical mind, but with your intuitive mind. What would this person say if they were trying to help you grow rather than annoy you? Jung discovered that when we approach our triggers this way, they transform from enemies into teachers. The very people who once drove us crazy become our greatest sources of self-knowledge and growth. Modern neuroscience has validated Jung's insights about projection and emotional reactivity. Research shows that when we have strong emotional reactions to others, the same neural pathways fire in our brains as when we're having those reactions to ourselves. Studies on mirror neurons demonstrate that we literally mirror the emotional states of people around us, but only when those states resonate with something already present in our own psychological makeup. Brain imaging studies show that people who practice shadow work techniques like Jung's show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for emotional regulation and self-awareness, and decreased activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear and anger center. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's measurable, scientific fact. Jung's method creates actual structural changes in your brain that make you less reactive and more emotionally stable. Jung identified 4 distinct stages in the development of emotional mastery. Stage 1, unconscious projection. You react emotionally to others without understanding why. You blame external circumstances and other people for your emotional states. Stage 2. Recognition. You begin to notice your patterns of reactivity. You start to see that certain types of people or behaviors consistently trigger you. Stage 3. Withdrawal of projections. You begin to see how your reactions reflect your own disowned shadow material. You start taking responsibility for your emotional states. Stage 4. Integration. You no longer project your shadow onto others because you've consciously integrated these aspects of yourself. You become virtually unshakable emotionally. Most people never move beyond stage 1. They spend their entire lives being emotionally reactive, blaming others for their inner turmoil. But once you understand Jung's method, you can progress through all 4 stages and achieve true emotional mastery. Here's your challenge, and this is where the real transformation happens. Think of the person who triggers you more than anyone else in your life, the one who can send you into an emotional spiral just by walking into the room. Now, apply Jung's method to this person. Ask yourself, what shadow aspect of myself does this person represent? What quality are they displaying that I've disowned in myself? Your mind will fight this question with everything it has. It will insist that you're nothing like this person, that they're clearly the problem, that this technique doesn't apply in this case. That resistance is your ego desperately trying to maintain its self-image. But if you can push through that resistance and honestly examine how you're like this person, you'll experience one of the most liberating moments of your life. The person who once had the power to completely disrupt your emotional equilibrium will suddenly seem like just another human being, struggling with the same shadow material we all carry. When you master Jung's method, something extraordinary happens that extends far beyond just not getting angry anymore. Your relationships transform. People sense that you're no longer projecting onto them, and they respond by being more authentic with you. Conflicts that once seemed insurmountable resolve naturally because you're no longer feeding them with unconscious projections. Your self-awareness explodes. Every person who triggers you becomes a teacher, showing you exactly which parts of yourself need attention and integration. Your energy increases dramatically. The massive amount of psychological energy you've been spending on maintaining projections and fighting shadow material gets freed up for creativity, growth, and genuine connection with others. You become genuinely compassionate. When you see your own shadow clearly, you stop judging others for theirs. You understand that we're all fighting the same internal battles, just in different forms. But here's Jung's most profound insight, the one that completes this entire method. The goal isn't to eliminate anger or emotional disturbance entirely. The goal is to transform your relationship with these experiences so they become tools for growth rather than sources of suffering. When you've integrated your shadow, anger becomes information. It tells you when your boundaries are being crossed or when something important to you is being threatened. But it no longer controls you or clouds your judgment. When you've withdrawn your projections, disturbance becomes curiosity. Instead of being overwhelmed by difficult emotions, you become interested in what they're trying to teach you about yourself. This is the true freedom Jung discovered, not the absence of difficult emotions, but the ability to remain centered and conscious even when they arise. So here's what you do starting today. First, commit to the mirror exercise. Every time someone triggers you, ask, how am I like this person? Don't let yourself off the hook with surface-level answers. Go deeper. Second, start a shadow journal. Each night, write down the people and behaviors that bothered you that day. Then, Explore how each one might reflect a disowned aspect of yourself. Third, practice active imagination with your triggers. Have conversations with the parts of yourself that these people represent. Fourth, work on integrating your shadow consciously. If you discover you have disowned anger, find healthy ways to express it. If you've disowned neediness, acknowledge your needs and ask for help when appropriate. And finally, be patient with yourself. Jung called this work the most difficult task that can be undertaken because it requires you to face and embrace parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life. But here's what awaits you on the other side. A life where other people's behavior can no longer disturb your peace. A life where anger becomes your ally, not your enemy. A life where you're free from the unconscious projections that have been controlling you since childhood. Jung discovered this freedom through his own dark night of the soul. He descended into the depths of his own psyche and emerged with a map for the rest of us to follow. The question now is, will you have the courage to follow that map? Will you take responsibility for your emotional reactions and discover the shadow material that's been running your life from the unconscious? Or will you continue living as an emotional victim, forever at the mercy of other people's behavior? The choice, as Jung would say, is always yours. But remember, every person who triggers you is offering you a gift, the chance to become more whole, more conscious, more free. The Jung method isn't just about never getting angry again. It's about becoming the master of your own inner world so that no external circumstance can ever again rob you of your peace. That's the true power Jung discovered. That's the freedom waiting for you. The only question left is, are you ready to claim it?